Hello, Algebra 2, and welcome to our second video over solving exponential equations, not covering inequalities. So in other words, we're covering part 2 of solving exponential equations. So just a recap, in our last video, we learned what an exponential expression is, and we learned how to solve exponential equations, such as this one, by making the bases the same. And if the bases are the same, just set the exponents equal, and you would have your answer. You would have the number for the variable. So part 2, we're going to just take it up a notch. But before I show you the examples we're going to cover today, let me go over a little bit of math information that will help us in the examples. So a few weeks ago, we covered what to do if we have a variable raised to a negative power. And we mathematicians do not like negative exponents, so we need to rewrite this somehow so that the exponent is positive instead of negative. And the trick that we talked about is taking the x to negative 3, rewriting it as x negative 3 over 1, and then what you need to do is basically flip the two expressions. And by doing that, with the 1 on top and the x to the power on the bottom, it makes the power positive. So in other words, x to the negative 3 is the same thing as 1 over x cubed. And just to make sure, it turns out that we could do the reverse as well if we want to. So in other words, if we had x to 1 over x cubed, we could go ahead and flip them again so that we would have x to the negative cubed. Now some of you are wondering, why would we want to do that? We already have the power positive. Why would we want to redo what we just did to make our power negative? Well, it's not specifically that we don't want the power to be negative. It's more specifically by doing this, we no longer have the fraction that was here. So just keep this in mind, and by keeping that in mind, you'll see why doing that is important in the next examples. So moving on, let's go to our first example. So we have a new type of exponential equation that we need to solve. In this case, it's 16 to the power of x equal to 1 over 64. And right away, some of us may feel uncomfortable with the fact that one part of our equation is a fraction. But never fear, we can change it so that it is no longer 1 over 64, or in other words, it is no longer a fraction. So let's just go ahead and rewrite 1 over 64 over here. And while we're at it, let's rewrite 64 on the bottom as 64 to the first power. And we know this to be true because 64 raised to the first power is still just 64. And then just by doing that trick that I showed you a minute ago, let's go ahead and flip the two numbers so that the 1 is on bottom and the 64 is now on top. So by doing that, 1's on the bottom and 64 is on top. But by doing so, instead of the 1 being positive, it is now negative. Or in other words, it's now 64 to the negative 1. So in other words, 1 over 64 is equal to 64 to the negative 1 power. And it turns out this little fact right here will be useful to helping us solve our exponential equation. So now let's go back to the left here and go back to our equation. Let's go ahead and take care of rewriting. 16x, we'll still leave it as that. But now, 1 over 64, let's rewrite that as 64 to the negative 1. So now the fraction's gone. It's no longer an issue. We now have bases that we can work with so that we can now try and rewrite them so that the bases are, we can try and make the bases the same. So, fractions out of the way, let's move on to solving. So now we look at our bases. We see the bases are not the same. So let's start with the bigger base, and let's see if we can try and rewrite it in terms of the smaller base, which is 16. So if we go over here again, give me a second, let me draw a little barrier to separate information. So let's look at 64. And let's try to rewrite it in terms of having a base of 16. And if we experiment, we kind of hit a roadblock because we all know that 64 is not the same thing as 16 squared. Specifically, 16 squared is the same thing as 256, which is nowhere close to 64. Hang on. 16 squared is equal to 265, which is nowhere close to 64. So we're kind of in a roadblock right here. But maybe, what if we try and rewrite not only 64, but let's try and rewrite 16 as well, and see if we can find a base that they share in common. So I'm going to go ahead and erase the notes over here. And some of you might have recognized already that maybe we could possibly use 4. Because we know 16 is the same thing as 4 times 4. And 64 is the same thing as multiplying 4 3 times. So in other words, 16 is the same thing as 4 squared. And 64 is the same thing as 4 cubed. Maybe using these two pieces of information can help us figure out what we need. What we need in order to solve our equation. So let's use these two facts over here on the left. So now, instead of 16x here, let's go ahead and rewrite 16 as 4 squared. Because 4 times 4 squared is 16. So 16 is 4 squared, but we still have the x on the outside. And then 64 is the same thing as 4 cubed. But we still have the negative 1 on the outside, so that still needs to stay. All right, so then from here, let's go ahead and multiply the powers for each one of these. We multiply 2 times x. That will give us 2x for the first part. And then we got to multiply 3 times negative 1, which will give us negative 3 as the second power. And check it out. We have bases that are the same. They're both equal to 4. So from here, just set the two exponents equal and solve. So we'll have 2x equal to negative 3, and just divide by 2, and you get x is equal to negative 3 halves, or negative 3 over 2. Now, some of you may feel a little uncomfortable, like you may say, we haven't had answers as fractions before. Are we allowed to have that? Well, yes. Yes, we can. And it turns out, if we actually double check this answer, it does work. So give me a moment. I'm just going to erase these notes over here just to make a little room. Oh, and also, you don't have to erase any of the notes I erase. This is mostly just for me to have space. So let's go ahead and double check. And while we're at it, let's just go ahead and plug the negative 3/2 into this part, the 4 to the 2x and the 4 to the negative 3. Let's plug in that negative 3/2 into this equation. You'll get 4 times 2, 4 to the power of 2 times negative 3 over 2 equal to 4 to the negative 3/2, to the negative 3. And if you multiply 2 to the negative 3/2, you can rewrite that 2 as negative 2 over 1. You see your 2's cancel, top and bottom, and then that just gives you 4 to the negative 3 over 1 equal to 4 to the negative 3. And of course, negative 3 over 1 is still negative 3. You don't even have to check to see what those actual numbers are for the negative 3, because we can see they're 100% identical. So in other words, it is possible to have fractions as your final answer. So that's our first example that we've come with in terms of dealing with a fraction being in our equation. Let's go take a look at another example so we can just get some practice. So now we have 1/2 to the power of 2x, rewritten, set and equal to 4 to the power of x plus 1. So right away, we do not like that fraction being in this expression. So just over here, let's take that 1/2 and let's raise 2 to the power of 1. And let's go ahead and switch these around so that it's no longer a fraction. And that's going to have 1 on bottom, 2 is going to be on top, but now it's going to have a new power of 2 to the negative 1. Or in other words, just 2 to the negative 1. So then let's use this fact in our exponential equation. Using that fact, let's rewrite our expression. So instead of 1/2 on the inside, we'll have 2 to the negative 1 on the inside, but still have that 2x on the outside. And this is going to be set equal to 4 to the x plus 1. And while we're at it, let's go ahead and multiply the negative 1 to the 2x. So then this will become 2 to the negative 2x equal to 4 to the x plus 1. All right, so we no longer have fractions anymore. We're good. We can breathe easy. Now we can do what we always do. Look at the bases, make those bases the same, then just set the exponents equal. So they're not the same. Let's see if we can rewrite the bigger base in terms of the smaller base. And as all of us know, 4 is the same thing as 2 squared, and that's exactly what we want. So over here, we'll have 2 to the negative 2x. Instead of 4, we'll have 2 squared, and then the power x plus 1 is still on the outside. And again, don't forget, if you have a 2 being multiplied to an actual equation, in this case x plus 1, the 2 needs to be distributed to the x and to the 1. So let's go ahead and do that over here. We'll have 2 to the negative 2x. Set that equal to 2. But now the new power will multiply that 2 times x, which is 2x, and then multiply the 2 to the 1, and that gives us positive 2. All right, we're almost done. Those bases are now the same. So let's go ahead and just set those exponents equal. So by doing that, we'll have negative 2x equal to 2x plus 2. And as always, let's go ahead and solve for x. I'm going to go ahead, for this example, I'm going to minus 2x to both sides. There's no more x's on the right side, and negative 2x minus 2x will give me negative 4x. And that's still going to be equal to 2 on the right side. Then, to get the x alone, just divide by negative 4. So final answer, x is equal to 2 over negative 4, which reduces to negative 1/2. And voila, we have our final answer. And again, you can always double check by plugging it back into the original equation. But I'm gonna have you guys do that on your own. But for now, go ahead and try the Ed puzzle question on your own. And once you're done, we'll go over it. All right, welcome back. You should have tried the Ed puzzle by now. If you got it correct, good for you. If not, just go ahead and watch me do it, and hopefully you can find what you did wrong. So right away, the 1 over 81, not really nice to work with. So let's go ahead and change it. So 1 over 81, let's rewrite the 81 part as having a power of 1. And just like we've done before, let's switch the top and the bottom. So it's going to give us 1 on the bottom. 81 is going to be on top, but now its power is going to be negative. So in other words, 1 over 81 is the same thing as 81 raised to the power of negative 1. So then using this little fact, let's go ahead and rewrite our exponential equation. So for right now, let's leave the 9 alone. And over here, instead of 1 over 81, let's write 81 to the negative 1 power. And we still have the x plus 2 on the outside. And while we're at it, let's go ahead and distribute that negative 1 to both the x and the 2. And by doing that, the new power for 81 will be negative x, because negative 1 times x is negative x. And then negative 1 minus 2 is minus 2. All right, so now fraction's gone. B, we rest at ease. Now we can just look at our bases and try and make them the same. So they're not the same. Start with the bigger base and try to rewrite it as the smaller base. And as we all know, 81 is the same thing as 9 squared, which is exactly what we want for this example. So then going back to the left side, let's go ahead and rewrite our equation. So 81, we will now make that 9 squared, but we still have the negative x minus 2 on the outside. And as always, let's go ahead and take that 2 and distribute it to the negative x and the negative 2. Let's go ahead and do that over here. We still have 9 to the negative x minus 2 over here. And that's going to be equal to base of 9. And then 2 times negative x will be negative 2x. And then 2 times negative 2 is negative 4. So now our bases are the same. Let's just go, and with that fact, go ahead and set the exponents equal, and let's find our x value. So then right underneath, I'm going to put x minus 2 equal to negative 2x minus 4. And we just have a regular equation that we need to solve for x4. And for this example, I'm going to add 2x to both sides. If you subtracted x to both sides, that is also correct. And then while I'm at it, let's go ahead and add a 2 to both sides. So then on this side, the left side, we have x plus 2x, which is now 3x. And over on the right side, we have negative 4 plus 2, which is negative 2. Then just divide by 3 on both sides. And I kind of ran out of room. I'll do it over here. We divide by 3 to both sides, and you get x is equal to negative 2 over 3. So it was nothing, these examples were not too different from what we've worked with in the first video, where we just had to make the bases the same. The only thing that was different this time was we had to figure out how to deal with bases that were fractions. And we know that basically flipping the fraction and making the exponent negative will help us out in this case. So if you have any questions or concerns, make sure you write them down, and we will address your questions tomorrow. But for the time being, here is the assignment that we will work on in class tomorrow. If you want to go ahead and get started, you can. And have any questions about those examples, the problems that you try on the assignment. And with that, I will see you guys tomorrow.